It's no secret. I think these are the wrong economic policies. I'd like to see a change in course. But the purpose of this hearing is both talk about the report and we hope shed some insight into, some of the challenges we've got. So my question really is not a gotcha question. It really deals with labor force participation. It's been troubling in the recovery and a number of that data continues to stay extremely low. It really masks the accuracy of the unemployment rate. Some have tried to say the decline since 2007, or at least not the increases, come from demographic change. Chairman, I had our staff really go through and look sort of in each of the key age groups, looking at the demographic shifts. We used a 12-month moving average, unadjusted data, take out seasonality, look at the narrower age groups so we can try to figure out exactly what's going on. Using that metrics, the decline in labor force participation, while most assume it's just seniors growing out and retiring, the numbers seem to show the only increases are in the little upper age areas, and some of the more serious declines are in that 16 to 59-year-old range. We've been looking at those factors as well to try to determine what is driving that. What would you attribute that to? What are some of the factors you think are impacting that going for? And what would you do? What are some of the perhaps solutions for that challenge?
Right. Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the question, and I appreciate your interest in this topic. I think understanding the dynamics of labor force participation really is one of the most important issues in understanding the performance of the labor market today. In our analysis of this question, I would divide the change in the labor force participation rate into 4 general areas. The first is the demographic trend, and our analysis, like a range of other analysts, would suggest that about half of the decline in the labor force participation rate is due to demography. And I think that's important because sometimes if you're looking, for example, at changes in the employment population ratio over time, those can give you a misleading picture of the economy because they don't adjust for those demographic
I would agree with that.
changes. The second set of factors are longer run trends that are not just the aging of the population, but represent other factors. And I think you're picking up some of those in the chart you have here. For younger Americans, some people are, for example, staying in school longer, and that lowers their participation rate. There's more older Americans now who are in the types of jobs that they're able to work in until older ages. So there's been a trend of people working longer at an older age. I think those trends that aren't related to aging roughly net out to 0 in terms of the overall explanation, but they're very important for particular groups. Next is, the third one is the normal movements of the business cycle. And anytime unemployment is elevated, some people are going to, for example, take a little bit longer before they decide to return to the labor force and look for a job, or maybe even get discouraged and not want to look for a job. As the unemployment rate comes down, a lot of those people return to the labor force. And we have been seeing that, and we expect to continue seeing that. Finally, some of that reduction in participation is probably related to the increase in long-term unemployment and represents that people have been out of work for years. It's been a tough economy for years. It was a really deep crisis that we went through, and that can have some longer-term effects on the economy. In terms of the policy implications, I'll just be very brief. Demographic, some of that is just inevitable, but through steps like immigration reform, we can go against the headwind there and make progress on participation. In terms of the cyclical component, anything that strengthens aggregate demand, brings the unemployment rate down more quickly, will help with that. And then finally, that last component I talked about, which is probably related to long-term unemployment, steps to help connect the long-term unemployed with jobs will bring some of those people back into the labor force too.
How would, two thoughts based on your views. I understand a cyclical business climate, but over the past 4.5 years, this participation rate, even as unemployment's come down from 10% significantly, that hasn't budged. In a normal business cycle, you would think it would begin to trend upward to some degree, and certainly among those age groups in their prime working years. How would you explain that?
I think in aggregate, and then I'll get to the age groups, you're seeing two trends going in opposite directions. One is as you recover,
Excuse me.
It brings people back into the labor force, but then you still have people aging and leaving the labor force. And in aggregate, those two effects have been roughly offsetting each other, and that's why you haven't seen the participation rate recovering. If you look, the Congressional Budget Office, for example, projects that the economy will recover, but that recovery will not be enough to offset the demographic impact, and that over the medium and long run, you'll continue to see the participation rate fall for that reason. If you look at some particular age groups, I think it is partly that I think there's another important factor, which is related, as I said, to just how deep the recession was, what long-term unemployment, which remains very elevated, and the flip side of it, which is its impact on participation.
I know we need to wrap up time. Briefly, how do you view immigration reform as improving the labor participation rate?
Well, first of all, by bringing more workers into the country, it expands the labor force. And second of all, the age ratio of the people that come into the country are more working age people relative to older retired people. So it doesn't just improve the quantity of labor, it improves the ratios as well. And that's why the Congressional Budget Office and other analysts have said that it would raise the labor force participation rate.
Okay. Seems counterintuitive. Let's thank you, Chairman. Are you ready? Sorry about that.
No, I'm all right.
Recognize Vice Chairman Klobuchar.